Okay, so when it talks about verifying inverses, I kind of talked about this earlier in the lesson. It's this idea of your x's and y's switching. So if we drew this line right here, this x equals y line, what happens here is if a point in your graph is 6 comma 2, or I'm sorry, 2 comma 6, your corresponding point should be 6 comma 2 because we're flipping this x and y over. And this 1 comma 3 turns into 3 comma 1, which you can see right here. And it's doing this for every point on this line. So what happens here is every point on the line gets flipped over. That kind of makes sense, guys? But why? Because the whole idea, that's actually a good question. Why does that work? Because what's happening is an inverse function. So an inverse function changes your input to your output. So if your input to your output changes, your inverse function is an input of y gives you an x. So that's how come your x's and y's flip. Does that does that make sense? Um, I don't think we did inverse functions in algebra one. We might have. I might have told you like for a second, like, hey guys, you might learn inverse functions in algebra two. So here's a quick sneak peek of it. So that might have been what happened. I think. Wait, did we do it? I don't know. But the people watching this video right now are probably like, I don't care about what you guys did in algebra one. But that's the main idea is that we're switching our x and y values. And that makes sense because if you watch the previous video, the first step was change f of x to y. And then the second step was switch or actually they have it backwards for some reason on Edmentum, but the next step was solve for x, and then step 3 was switch your x and y. So this part right here is the reason why these two end up switching. Does that make sense? All right, cool. So moving on to the next slide. So here they literally show the steps one by one. So remember, replace your f of x with your y, solve for your new x. So they have that replacement, then they're doing the steps. So it's like, oh, we have to get rid of this fourth root. So the way you get rid of a root is a power. So that's how come they're doing this 4. It crosses out. They don't show the step, but you do cross it out that way, making that a 4. They're dividing by 16. And then now so they divide by 16. I don't like how they switch these. They keep switching these, and I don't like it. So I'm going to leave it as 4y over 16. And then what they're doing here, they're making it a little more complicated than they have to do it, but they're taking the extra step of going like, let's find the fourth root of 16. 2. And if you guys ever taken the roots before, the square root would be 4. But since there's a group of 4 2s, the fourth root of 16 would be 2. So they're just making it more complicated by going like, oh, this is y over 2, and we're going to fourth that. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, because I know I went through that fast. But that's all that they're doing. You could literally leave it like this and you'd be fine. But they're being a little extra right now. So technically your answer could also be f inverse of x equals what is it? X over 16, and this is to the power of 4. It's the same thing. So if you guys don't like doing this step, you don't have to. Don't do it. So that's just another way of doing it. I feel like this step right here is a little complicated, in my opinion. So moving on. This next one, it's just showing us the graph side by side to prove that it works that way. Again, if you just put it as x to the fourth root over 16, it's going to work out. The reason why that works out is, think of it logically. If we do this, two times two is 4, 2 times 2 is 4, so you get x4 over 16. So they're just being extra. Right there. You don't have to worry about it. If you want to do it, go for it. It's more practice. But just be aware that this is a possibility for when you're taking your mastery test, that they might be a little extra on the multiple choice answers. Well, again, if you miss it because they're being extra, like, I can always give you partial credit afterwards, as long as you can explain to me why you picked the answer you did. So show your work. What does this slide talk about? We talk about this. Y equals. So it's talking about flipping it. So it's like, if a function contains these points, then the inverse would contain these points. So it's literally talking about just switching this so we could get this. And you can see that if we switch these two, they don't change because 2 and 2 are the same thing. This one, they will switch completely. Your negative sign just changes because one of them, your y is negative, so that means your x is negative on the next one. Yeah. So if there's a question like that on the mastery test, it's like, well, what are your points going to be? There might be something like this. They might say, like, if your domain, I don't know how to spell apparently. If your domain is 0, 1, 2, 3, what is the range of f inverse of x? And honestly, it's just going to be the same thing, because if your domain of f of x, your domain and your range switch, because remember, x is your domain, y is your range. So if we're dealing with switching x and y, that means we're going to be switching our x, our domain and range. Does that make sense? Cool. Nick, are you okay? Because you sound quiet. Okay. So that's all that's basically happening right here. You're just switching your x and y. So if you're switching your x and y, that means your domain of f of x is your range of f inverse of x. What does this show all do? So that's what's happening. All right, so here the graph represents our f of x. So which set of points represents our f inverse of x? So in order to do that, we're going to have to find these points. So this point is -3, 1. This point is 2 comma 1? 2 comma 1.5, because they're being extra right now. This one is 7 2. Am I looking at this wrong? I am looking at this wrong. I'm sorry. So for some reason they have the numbers above the line. So this one is, I was right on this one. This one was -3 comma 1. This one is 2 comma 2, and this one is 7 comma 3. So if we're switching these over, our inverse, let me do it in a different color, is 1 comma -3, 2 comma 2, and 3 comma 7. So the only one of these answers that has those switched over would be this one. So that's all you're doing. You're literally just switching them. So maybe you're right, Nick. Maybe there will be one where you literally just have to switch them on the mastery test. And here they're just doing a summary of that problem where it was talking about Sandra's problem, where if she's driving 55 miles per hour, how do we recognize the fine of her ticket? So her ticket was this much. So you would plug in your X into here. So if her ticket's this much, what you're going to do is you're going to plug you're going to need your inverse. So you're going to find the inverse. That way you can just plug in. Because before, what we would do in algebra, we would just take this, plug it into the Y, and solve for X. But let's say we have like a bunch of tickets. Let's say Sandra keeps speeding forever, and then she has another ticket that's like $300, and another ticket that's like, I don't know, 100. Yeah. Yeah. So let's say she keeps having those all these tickets, and she's like, I want to know what my high score is for speeding. So since this was the fastest, biggest ticket, I want to know what my high score is in my speeding, which I do not recommend and I do not condone. So so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna find the inverse by switching our x and y, and then we're going to solve for our x. So again, for some reason, they like moving this over here, which it does make sense in the end, because then you're going to have your f inverse at the end. But it's kind of weird how they don't explain that they're switching that. And so basically what we can do is we can plug this ticket, the cost of the ticket, into here, and your new value, this is going to be your speed. So before it's like you plug in your speed here and you get your fine, but now you can plug your fine into there and then figure out what your high score is. Um, so there you go. That's your inverse. That's how you can find out what it's doing. I'm assuming the next slide we're actually plugging it in. So they plug. Oh, here they're checking to verify if it is the inverse. So they're plugging your function into your inverse function and you get x. So on the test, guys, try to show some of this work. I don't want to see just f inverse of f of x is equal to x. Show some work, please, when you're doing your unit activity, even if it's a picture on a Google Doc. Uh, what's up? Not for the modules, no. Unit activities are for the entire unit, not for the modules. No, dude, you'll get it for unit 1 later. Watch. So, oh, you're right. There is no unit activity. Okay. Oh yeah, there's not a unit activity until Unit 2. Okay. So sorry about that, guys. Okay. So you guys aren't going to have to plug in functions for your unit activity because there is no unit activity. So here what they're doing is now they're going to plug in her ticket and they're going to figure out how fast she was going. So she was going 80 miles an hour. So she was like booking it. All right. And then, so guys, one thing that I've noticed that'll help out a lot is watch the summary right before you do your mastery test because I've noticed on um other subjects they'll have like the summary sheet and they'll literally go over everything you learned in the entire thing. I know it's obvious because it's summary, but if you really master everything that they teach you in the summary, you should be able to do really good on the mastery test, if that makes sense. Always watch your summary right before your mastery test.